We all dream of winning the lottery. We imagine that if we just had enough money, all our problems would vanish. We could buy whatever we want, stop working, and live like kings. But history teaches us a darker lesson. It teaches us that sudden unearned wealth is not a blessing, it is a virus. And sometimes finding the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow doesn't save you, it kills you. This is the story of the Spanish Empire. In the 16th century, they didn't just win the lottery, they found the bank. They discovered the largest source of silver the world had ever seen. They became the masters of the earth, the first empire on which the sun never set. They had the best army, the biggest ships, and a direct line to God. And then, in a twist of irony that economists still study today, they watched it all burn. They learned the hardest lesson in history. Gold is not wealth. Gold is a drug. And Spain was about to overdose. To understand this tragedy, we must travel back to a barren, freezing plateau high in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia. The year is 1545, the location is Potosi. Before this moment, Spain was a powerful nation, but it was not economically invincible. They were a society of warriors fresh from the Reconquista, deeply religious men hardened by centuries of war who valued the sword over the ledger. But everything changed when a local indigenous man named Diego Gualpa stumbled while chasing a llama. Legend says that to catch his balance, Gualpa grabbed a bush. When the roots pulled away from the loose earth, he saw something that would change the destiny of the human race. Shimmering veins of pure silver. He had found the Cerro Rico, the rich hill. It was a geological freak of nature. It wasn't just a mine. The mountain was practically made of solid silver ore. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived and realized what they were standing on, they couldn't believe their eyes. This was the El Dorado they had been searching for. It was infinite money, just waiting to be dug up. They immediately set to work. Potosi transformed almost overnight from a desolate wasteland into one of the largest and most chaotic cities in the world. Within a few decades, this mining camp had a population larger than London or Paris. It was a city of greed, violence, and unimaginable wealth, perched at 13,000 feet above sea level, where the air was so thin men gasped for breath just walking down the street. It was a place where fortunes were made in an hour and lives were lost in a second. But to get the silver out, Spain needed more than just luck. They needed blood. And this is where the economic miracle began to look more like a human nightmare. The Spanish instituted the mita system, a mandatory draft of indigenous labor that would stain their soul forever. Tens of thousands of indigenous men were forced into the dark, suffocating tunnels of Potosi. They worked in week-long shifts, never seeing the sun, carrying heavy sacks of ore up rickety ladders that could snap at any moment. It was a brutal existence. The conditions were so horrific that a grim saying emerged among the locals. If you squeezed the silver coins of Spain, blood would drip out. The mountain was given a new name by the people who died there, the mountain that eats men. But digging the ore was only half the battle. The rock itself was low grade. To extract the pure silver, the Spanish utilized a new industrial technology that was as revolutionary as it was deadly: the mercury amalgamation process. They mixed the crushed rock with toxic mercury and forced men to trample it with their bare feet for days on end. The mercury poisoned them, eating away at their bodies from the inside out. But it allowed Spain to extract silver at an industrial scale never seen before in human history. The output was staggering. Between 1550 and 1800, the mines of Mexico and Peru produced 80% of the world's silver. And almost all of it flowed to Spain. They melted it down into heavy bars and minted the most famous coin in history, the piece of 8. This wasn't just a coin. It was the first true global currency, the dollar of the Renaissance. It was accepted in markets from Shanghai to Seville, from Boston to Bombay. Spain controlled the money supply of the entire planet. Twice a year, the Flota de Indias, the great treasure fleets, would gather in Havana, Cuba. These were massive convoys of galleons, heavily armed and riding low in the water, weighed down by billions of dollars in today's money. When their sails appeared on the horizon off the coast of Spain, church bells would ring across the entire country. The king breathed a sigh of relief. The bankers rubbed their hands together. The party could continue for another year. Spain became the superpower of Europe instantly. They had the tercios, the feared infantry squares that were undefeated on the battlefield. They built massive cathedrals adorned with real gold leaf. The King of Spain, first Charles V and later his son Philip II, became the masters of the universe. They believed God had chosen Spain to lead the world. But as they looked at their mountains of silver, they made a fatal calculation. They said, "We are rich." They didn't realize that they were actually planting the seeds of their own destruction. They were making the classic mistake that destroys lottery winners and empires alike, confusing money with wealth. Money is just a medium of exchange. Wealth is the ability to produce things: food, clothes, tools, ships. Spain had found infinite money, but they were about to stop producing wealth. The silver was acting like a narcotic. It provided a massive high, a feeling of invincibility. But deep inside the economy, the vital organs were shutting down. The addiction began slowly, then all at once. Deep inside the Spanish economy, a rot was spreading. The farmers started leaving their fields. The blacksmiths put down their hammers. Why work in the hot sun when the ships are coming? Why make things when you can just buy them? Imagine you are a shoemaker in the city of Seville in the year 1550. Seville is the boomtown of the world, the gateway to the Americas. Suddenly a fleet arrives. Sailors and soldiers pour off the decks, their pockets heavy with silver. Everyone wants your shoes. So you do what any rational businessman does: you raise your prices. Now imagine this happening to everyone, everywhere, all at once. The baker raises the price of bread. The landlord raises the rent. The weaver raises the price of cloth. This is what historians call the price revolution. It was the first major inflationary crisis in modern history. As tons of silver flooded into Spain, the supply of money skyrocketed, but the supply of actual goods stayed the same. Prices in Spain rose by 400%. In a world used to stable prices, this was a catastrophe. The poor were crushed because their wages could not keep up with the cost of survival. A Spanish peasant found that even though there was more silver in the country than ever before, he was starving. But for the rich, the problem was even more insidious. Because inflation made everything in Spain so expensive, Spanish industries committed suicide. Let's go back to our shoemaker. His shoes now cost 10 silver coins because he has to pay so much for food and leather. But a shoemaker in France or England, where the gold hasn't flooded in, yet can make the exact same shoes for just 2 coins. So what does the Spanish consumer do? He stops buying Spanish shoes, he buys the imported French ones. Spain became a funnel. The silver would arrive in Seville, be unloaded by the ton, and within weeks, it would flow straight out of the country to France, England, and the Netherlands to pay for imports. Spain was doing all the hard work enslaving the miners, sailing the dangerous oceans, fighting the pirates only to hand the money over to their rivals to buy dinner. A famous saying from the time emerged: Spain is the mouth that receives the food, chewing it for the rest of Europe. This economic reality destroyed the culture of the nation. In England and the Netherlands, a merchant class was rising, building factories and shipyards. But in Spain, working for a living became seen as shameful. The ideal Spaniard was not the entrepreneur, but the hidalgo, the son of something. The hidalgo was a minor noble who owned a patch of land, did no manual labor, and lived off a government pension. The dream was to get a government job near the silver tap, not to start a business. Impoverished nobles would rather starve to death polishing their armor than dirty their hands with trade. Spain was becoming hollow. On the outside, it looked shiny and golden, adorned with the plunder of the Americas. But inside, it was rotting. There was no production. There was no innovation. There was only the wait for the next fleet. And this reliance created a terrifying vulnerability. The entire stability of the empire depended on wooden ships crossing an ocean full of storms and enemies. If the wind didn't blow, the king couldn't eat. And the king, Philip II, had a very large appetite. King Philip II didn't just want to be rich. He wanted to rule the world. Sitting in his gloomy palace, El Escorial, surrounded by monks and mountains of paperwork, he saw himself as the planet king. But owning the planet was expensive. Philip believed he was the sword of God, destined to defend Catholicism against the Protestants in the north and the Ottoman Turks in the east. This meant fighting everyone, everywhere, all at once. He fought the Turks in the Mediterranean. He fought the French in Italy, but his biggest bleeding wound was the Netherlands. The 80-year war to crush the Dutch rebellion was a logistical nightmare. Because Spanish industry was dead, Philip often had to buy gunpowder and cannons from foreign merchants, sometimes even from the Dutch themselves. The silver from Potosi was literally funding Spain's enemies to kill Spanish soldiers. The height of this madness was the Spanish Armada in 1588. To punish Queen Elizabeth I, Philip assembled the most expensive naval force in human history. But to pay for it, he didn't use the silver he had. He used the silver he hoped to get. This is where the dark side of Spanish finance was revealed, the Asiantos. These were short-term, high-interest loans from German and Genoese bankers. Philip was essentially taking out payday loans on an imperial scale, promising to pay them back when the treasure fleet arrived. But the Armada was a disaster. It wasn't defeated by a superior navy but by storms and bad luck. The ships sank, but the debt did not. The bankers didn't care about God's wind. They wanted their money. By the 1570s, the interest payments on the national debt were larger than the entire tax revenue of the Spanish Empire. Think about that. Every penny collected in taxes, plus every ounce of silver from the Americas, was not enough to pay even the interest. Philip II became the father of the sovereign default. In 1557, with the treasury empty, he stood before his court and issued a decree. I am not paying. It was a financial earthquake. Banks in Europe collapsed overnight. But the tragedy was that Philip couldn't stop borrowing. He was addicted to war. He defaulted again in 1575, then 1596, 1607, and 1627. It became a cycle of destruction. Borrow, spend, crash. Spain was no longer an empire. It was just a shipping company for its creditors. The gold would arrive in Seville, be unloaded, and immediately transferred to the ledgers of Italian bankers. Back home in Spain, the situation turned from tragic to pathetic. Since all the silver was flowing out to foreign bankers, there was no money left for daily commerce within the country. Desperate, the crown began to debase the currency. They stopped minting silver coins for their own people and started minting coins made of pure copper, called vellone. It was junk money with no intrinsic value. The king forced his people to accept these copper tokens at the value of silver. It was a hidden tax that triggered hyperinflation on top of the existing inflation. The economy broke in two. The rich and the government dealt in real silver, while the poor were left trading worthless copper scraps. The middle class was wiped out. By the mid-1600s, the Spanish century was dead. The mies of Potosi began to dry up. And because Spain had spent 100 years buying things instead of learning how to make things, they had nothing to fall back on. They had no wool industry like England, no banking sector like the Dutch, and no luxury manufacturing like France. The cities of Castile, once bustling with trade, emptied out. The fields lay fallow. Spain descended into a long dark slumber of poverty and irrelevance. The empire that had owned the world became known as the sick man of Europe. Meanwhile, the countries that had taken Spain's silver, England and the Netherlands, used that capital to invest. They built merchant fleets, funded scientific research, and established stock exchanges. They realized the ultimate truth of economics that Spain had missed. Wealth isn't the metal you dig out of the ground. It is the productivity of your people. The Dutch used Spanish silver to build the ships that would dominate global trade. The British used Spanish silver to fund the Industrial Revolution. Spain was merely the conduit, the funnel through which the wealth of the Americas flowed to create the modern world, leaving Spain itself hollowed out and empty. The story of the Spanish Empire is the ultimate warning to any nation or individual. It is the story of the resource curse. Whether it's silver in 1550 or oil in the modern day, easy money breaks the link between work and reward. It creates the illusion of prosperity, but it is a rot that eats the foundation. Spain drowned in gold. They thought they were the masters of their destiny, but in the end, they were slaves to their own fortune. I am Branny, and this is Empires in Ruin. If you want to understand how the next economic collapse will happen, subscribe now. Because history never repeats itself, but it often rhymes.